A young woman,
I can't
22
imagine
years
why I
old
would
and
do
known in her
that.
community as Kayla Martinez, found herself at the center of one of the most harrowing criminal cases in recent Los Angeles history. Charged with multiple counts of murder and assault, Kayla stood accused of orchestrating a deadly shooting inside Pulse, a popular downtown nightclub renowned for its electric atmosphere and vibrant crowd. The night that would forever alter the lives of many began like any other in the city's bustling nightlife, but it quickly spiraled into chaos, leaving a trail of shattered lives and unanswered questions. Before we delve into the tragic and thought-provoking story of Kayla Martinez, a young woman whose life took a devastating turn following a nightclub shooting, be sure to subscribe and give us a thumbs up. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments about this case and your perspective on the complex issues it raises. Your engagement helps us continue exploring these impactful narratives that resonate deeply within our communities. On the evening of July 18th, Pulse was alive with pulsating beats and throngs of young people eager to escape the pressures of daily life. The club's sleek interior, bathed in kaleidoscopic lights and filled with the scent of expensive perfume and sweat, seemed like a haven for those seeking momentary reprieve. Among the revelers was Kayla, a figure who had become somewhat familiar within these circles, not just for her skillful dance moves and magnetic presence, but also for her enigmatic aura. Those who knew her described Kayla as a talented dancer, a member of several local crews whose life was a complex tapestry woven with both promise and peril. Witnesses would later recall the night's initial moments as electric and carefree, the DJ spinning a mix that had the crowd swaying in unison. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. The nightclub had long been a ground zero for simmering rivalries, and that night those tensions erupted with deadly force. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire shattered the music, sending patrons scrambling in panic as chaos engulfed the venue. The shooting was swift and brutal, leaving several dead and many others wounded in its wake. In the immediate aftermath, police swarmed the scene, securing the club and tending to the injured. Amidst the chaos, Kayla was apprehended near the bar, her demeanor unsettlingly detached. Instead of displaying fear or remorse, she reportedly began to dance, a hauntingly defiant display as officers led her away. This unexpected behavior left both law enforcement and witnesses perplexed, sparking intense scrutiny and speculation about her motives and mental state. Pulse had always been a staple of the downtown scene, attracting a diverse crowd ranging from artists and musicians to young professionals and long-time residents of the neighborhood. The shooting, however, shattered the illusion of safety within its walls. For many, the club was more than just a nightlife hotspot. It was a cultural hub, a place where creativity and community intertwined. The violent outbreak not only claimed lives, but also ripped through the social fabric of the city's nightlife, leaving a lingering sense of vulnerability and loss. Kayla's arrest marked the beginning of a tumultuous journey through the criminal justice system. But to understand the gravity of her alleged actions, it was essential to examine the backdrop against which her story unfolded. Raised in one of Los Angeles' most troubled neighborhoods, Kayla's upbringing was marked by hardship and limited opportunities. The streets she navigated as a child were fraught with gang activity, poverty, and systemic neglect, factors that shaped her worldview and choices. Her early years were punctuated by minor legal infractions, petty theft, curfew violations, and occasional run-ins with local law enforcement that painted a picture of a young woman struggling to find her place. Despite these challenges, Kayla's passion for dance offered a glimmer of hope. She channeled her energy into local dance crews, where she honed her craft and found a sense of belonging. Friends and acquaintances often spoke of her as a gifted performer, someone whose movements could captivate an audience and convey emotions words could not. Yet, beneath the surface of this artistic outlet lay a complex individual, caught between the allure of the stage and the harsh realities of her environment. The community's perception of Kayla was conflicted. To some, she represented the resilience of youth striving to overcome adversity. To others, she was a symbol of the dangers lurking within neighborhoods where violence and crime were all too common. This duality of image added layers of complexity to the case, challenging simplistic narratives and forcing observers to grapple with uncomfortable truths about the intersections of art, identity, and criminality. As news of the shooting spread, the media seized upon Kayla's enigmatic presence and her unusual behavior during her arrest. Footage of her dancing in handcuffs circulated widely, fueling a mix of fascination and condemnation. Commentators debated the meaning behind her actions. Was it a calculated act of defiance, a coping mechanism in the face of trauma, or something more sinister? The image of a young woman dancing amidst tragedy became a haunting symbol of the case, one that would dominate headlines and courtrooms alike. Law enforcement quickly moved to piece together the sequence of events that led to the shooting. Initial reports indicated the attack was not random, but rooted in deeper conflicts, possibly linked to gang rivalries and personal vendettas that had long simmered beneath the surface of the city's nightlife. Kayla's alleged involvement placed her at the nexus of these dangerous dynamics, raising questions about her role as both victim and perpetrator. The investigation that followed was exhaustive. Police combed through surveillance footage, interviewed witnesses, and analyzed forensic evidence, all while grappling with the complexity of the case. The nightclub's security cameras captured moments before, during, and after the shooting, providing vital clues but also revealing a fragmented and chaotic scene. Amid the confusion, Kayla's movements and interactions became a focal point, with authorities seeking to understand her motivations and connections. Throughout the early stages of the inquiry, Kayla remained largely silent, her inscrutable expression fueling speculation. Law enforcement officials noted her calm and collected demeanor, which contrasted sharply with the panic and grief swirling around her. Her choice to dance during interrogation was interpreted by some as an act of psychological resistance, a way to assert control in a situation where she had lost so much. Within the community, reactions were mixed and deeply emotional. Families of the victims mourned their loss, demanding justice and answers. At the same time, some voices called for a broader examination of the social conditions that bred such violence, pointing to systemic failures and the need for intervention. Kayla's story became a prism through which these larger issues were debated, highlighting the complex interplay between individual agency and societal forces. As the case moved toward prosecution, the gravity of the charges against Kayla loomed large. Multiple counts of murder and assault underscored the severity of the incident and the devastating impact it had on innocent lives. The young woman's past and present collided in a narrative charged with emotion, legal complexity, and cultural significance. The night of the Pulse nightclub shooting would come to define Kayla Martinez's life, casting her into the unforgiving spotlight of criminal justice and public scrutiny. Her story, rooted in a fractured community and marked by both artistic brilliance and tragic violence, set the stage for a legal battle that would challenge perceptions and test the limits of empathy and accountability. In the heart of Los Angeles, amid the echoes of shattered dreams and broken lives, a young woman faced the consequences of a night where music gave way to gunfire and dance became a haunting testament to chaos. The night inside Pulse had been electric moments before the violence erupted, a sanctuary pulsating with music, bodies moving in rhythm and laughter blending with the bass. But in an instant, the atmosphere fractured into chaos. At approximately 11:45 p.m. on July the 18th, the trigger was pulled, and the nightclub transformed from a haven of celebration into a scene of carnage. Gunfire erupted without warning, the sharp cracks echoing over the pounding beats, sending hundreds of patrons into a frenzied scramble for safety. Multiple rounds tore through the crowded dance floor and lounge areas, leaving victims collapsing amid overturned tables and shattered glasses. Panic engulfed the club as screams pierced the smoke-filled air, and the once lively crowd scattered in every direction, desperate to escape the storm of bullets. Eyewitnesses would later recount the terrifying moments. Friends torn apart, strangers shielding one another, and chaos reigning as instinct overrode reason. In the midst of the mayhem, Kayla Martinez was apprehended by officers who arrived swiftly on the scene. The police response had been rapid, with multiple units converging on the nightclub within minutes of the first distress calls. Upon entering, officers moved decisively to secure the premises and assist the wounded, their radios crackling with urgent updates and requests for medical support. What immediately drew attention was not only the violence, but Kayla's demeanor. When she was taken into custody near the bar area, she exhibited behavior that confounded both law enforcement and witnesses alike. Rather than displaying fear, confusion, or distress, Kayla was reported to have begun dancing, her movements deliberate and rhythmic, almost as though the chaos around her was a backdrop to a performance. This unexpected display of defiance during interrogation, captured on body cameras and later broadcast widely, became one of the case's most unsettling images. Inside the interrogation room, Kayla's dance was a surreal spectacle. She swayed to a silent beat, arms moving fluidly, a stark contrast to the gravity of the situation she faced. Officers noted her calm and seemingly composed state, a demeanor that veered from typical reactions expected from someone accused of such violent acts. Some speculated that the dance was a coping mechanism, a psychological shield against the trauma of the night. Others interpreted it as a calculated provocation, a demonstration of power in a moment meant to break her will. The initial shock among club patrons was palpable. Those who had escaped the shooting recounted scenes of devastation, shattered friendships, innocent bystanders caught in crossfire, and the frantic scramble to exit a place that had moments before been a sanctuary. Emergency medical teams arrived almost immediately, treating the injured on site and transporting critically wounded victims to nearby hospitals. The casualty count was grim, 4 fatalities and over a dozen wounded, some in critical condition. Police cordoned off the area, canvassing for witnesses and collecting evidence. Survivors described a scene torn apart by violence. The glass-strewn floors, bloodied clothing, and overturned furniture telling a silent story of desperation and fear. Witness statements painted a picture of a sudden, unprovoked eruption of gunfire with little warning and no clear escape routes for many inside. The rapid arrest of Kayla seemed to many an almost surreal conclusion to a night of horror. Some club-goers expressed disbelief that someone they had seen dancing moments before could be responsible for such carnage. Others, however, were haunted by the image of her defiant dance in custody, struggling to reconcile that behavior with the brutality of the shooting. First responders later described the scene inside Pulse as one of the most harrowing they had encountered. Paramedics and officers worked tirelessly amidst the chaos, their efforts hampered by the dense crowd and the lingering threat of violence. Bloodstains marked the walls and floors, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and fear. Medical personnel recounted moments of heartbreak, attempting to save lives in an environment where chaos reigned supreme. Surveillance footage from the club's security cameras became a crucial element in understanding the unfolding of events. The video captured the moments leading up to the shooting, revealing a tense exchange between groups that had been seated near one another earlier in the evening. The footage then showed the sudden appearance of an armed individual entering the main floor, followed by the outbreak of gunfire. Kayla's presence in the immediate vicinity of the shooting was unmistakable. Her movements caught on tape as she navigated the panic-stricken crowd. Law enforcement officials pieced together that the attack was not a spontaneous act, but rather a premeditated assault tied to escalating gang tensions that had plagued the area for months. The nightclub, a known hangout for several rival groups, had become an unintended battleground in their ongoing conflict. Investigators uncovered evidence suggesting that Kayla had played a pivotal role in planning the attack, though the exact motivations remained murky in the immediate aftermath. The community's response to the shooting was one of shock and mourning. Vigils were held in the days following the incident as families and friends grappled with the sudden loss of loved ones. Local leaders called for calm and urged law enforcement to pursue justice swiftly. The nightclub itself became a somber symbol of a night when celebration turned to sorrow, its doors shuttered as investigations continued. Amid this turmoil, Kayla's arrest and behavior during interrogation became a focal point of public discourse. News outlets replayed the footage of her dancing, sparking debate about her mental state and the message she intended to send. Some commentators viewed her actions as an affront to the victims and their families, while others suggested a deeper psychological explanation rooted in trauma or defiance against a system she perceived as oppressive. The police officers involved in her arrest recounted their surprise at her composure. Detective Marcus Lee, present at the scene, noted that Kayla's dancing was unlike anything he had witnessed during previous arrests. She was almost mocking the situation, moving as if the world around her didn't exist, he later testified. This behavior complicated the narrative, challenging assumptions about fear and guilt in the face of overwhelming evidence. As the investigation continued, forensic teams meticulously collected shell casings, DNA samples, and ballistic evidence inside the club. Forensic experts worked to match bullets to the weapons recovered and to reconstruct the trajectory of gunfire. This painstaking process was critical to establishing the sequence of events and identifying other potential suspects involved in the shooting. Witnesses provided detailed accounts of the shooting's progression, including descriptions of the assailant's appearance and actions. Many noted that Kayla appeared to move with purpose, not simply as a bystander caught in the crossfire. Her presence near the firearm and the timing of her movements raised questions about her direct involvement, reinforcing the prosecution's case that she was an active participant rather than a passive victim. Paramedics who treated the wounded painted a grim picture of the aftermath. One emergency responder who wished to remain anonymous recalled the harrowing scene. "We were working nonstop, triaging victims, performing CPR, trying to save as many as we could. The fear and confusion were overwhelming, but Kayla's dancing image stuck with me, like she was unaffected by the tragedy unfolding." His reflection echoed the sentiments of many who struggled to understand her behavior. In the days following her arrest, Kayla was held without bail, facing multiple charges including 4 counts of first-degree murder and numerous counts of assault with a deadly weapon. The prosecution's narrative centered on her alleged role as the mastermind behind the attack, highlighting the premeditated nature of the violence and the calculated defiance she displayed when confronted by law enforcement. The nightclub shooting and Kayla's arrest sent shock waves through Los Angeles, igniting conversations about gang violence, youth involvement in crime, and the challenges faced by communities caught in the crossfire. The stark contrast between the joyous energy of Pulse and the night's horrific violence underscored the fragile line between celebration and tragedy in urban life. As law enforcement sought to unravel the tangled web of motives and alliances, Kayla's story became emblematic of a broader struggle. A young woman caught between the lure of artistic expression and the harsh realities of a world where survival often demanded allegiance to dangerous forces. Her unexpected reaction during interrogation would become a defining moment in a case that promised to test the limits of justice and human understanding. Kayla Martinez's trajectory into the violent events at Pulse nightclub was shaped deeply by the environment in which she was raised, a neighborhood marked by economic hardship, limited resources, and an undercurrent of violence that seemed woven into daily life. Born and raised in South Los Angeles, Kayla's upbringing was a testament to the struggles faced by many young people caught in the crosshairs of systemic neglect and the cyclical nature of poverty and crime. The neighborhood, often portrayed in media through the lens of hardship, was home to resilient communities striving to carve out spaces of hope amid adversity. From an early age, Kayla confronted the realities of growing up in an environment where opportunities were scarce and the pressures to conform to street life were relentless. Her family, though loving, grappled with financial instability and the constant threat of neighborhood violence. School records revealed a student who was bright and creative, but frequently absent and distracted, a reflection of the distractions and dangers surrounding her. Teachers noted her artistic talents, especially in dance and performance, but also expressed concern over her involvement with peers who skirted the edges of legality. Kayla's early brushes with the law were minor, but telling. Arrest records showed a series of incidents, curfew violations, petty theft, and disorderly conduct, none of which seemed to result from deep malice, but rather from a young woman navigating a world filled with conflicting influences. Each offense was a snapshot of a life at the margins, where choices were constrained by circumstance and the allure of belonging often outweighed the risks. Despite these challenges, dance emerged as a crucial outlet and identity marker for Kayla. She became involved with several local dance crews, groups that performed at community events and battled in underground competitions. These crews were more than just hobbyist collectives. They were lifelines, offering a sense of family, structure, and purpose. Friends described Kayla as passionate and fiercely talented, someone whose movements could command attention and convey emotion in ways words could not. Dance was her language, her rebellion, and her refuge. Yet the dichotomy of her life was stark. While she dazzled on stage, off stage, she was entangled in the complex social fabric of her neighborhood, where gang affiliations and rivalries cast long shadows. The dance crews themselves often had ties, whether direct or indirect, to local gangs, blurring the lines between culture and conflict. These overlapping identities created a tension that was difficult to escape. For Kayla, the dance floor was a place of expression and escape, but the streets remained an inescapable reality. Neighbors often spoke of Kayla with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. Some remembered a bright-eyed teenager with dreams of making it big, while others saw a young woman increasingly drawn into dangerous circles. She had so much talent, but the streets, they pulled her in different directions, one longtime resident said. The duality of her image, both a promising artist and a potential threat, reflected the complexities of a community grappling with its own contradictions. Family members painted a picture of a girl caught between hope and despair. Her mother, Maria Martinez, spoke during a rare interview about Kayla's early years, recalling a child full of life and laughter. "She loved to dance since she was little," Maria said, her voice tinged with sorrow. "But as she grew older, things changed. The neighborhood changed her, and she got involved with people I didn't know." Maria's words underscored the painful divide between a mother's dreams and the harsh realities facing her daughter. Kayla's involvement in local dance crews was often seen as a double-edged sword. While these groups fostered creativity and community pride, they also were enmeshed in the social rivalries that plagued the area. Dance battles sometimes mirrored territorial disputes, and affiliations could shift quickly, leading to tensions that spilled beyond the stage. Kayla's skill made her a prominent figure in these circles, but it also placed her in precarious positions where loyalties were tested and dangers lurked. Her personal relationships further complicated the narrative. Close friends and acquaintances described Kayla as charismatic but volatile, someone whose moods could swing dramatically. Accounts from those who knew her well spoke of escalating aggression in the months leading up to the Pulse shooting, with incidents of verbal altercations and occasional physical confrontations. These behaviors hinted at underlying turmoil, possibly influenced by trauma and the pressures of her environment. Psychologists and social workers who later reviewed Kayla's background noted the significant impact of exposure to violence and instability during formative years. Trauma experts highlighted how such experiences could contribute to emotional dysregulation and risky behavior. In Kayla's case, her dance was not only an artistic outlet, but also a coping mechanism, a way to channel complex emotions that words failed to capture. The community's perception of Kayla was deeply divided. Some saw her as a victim of circumstance, a young woman whose potential was stifled by forces beyond her control. Others viewed her with suspicion and fear, associating her with the violence that had plagued the neighborhood for years. This polarization played out in local media and public discourse, where simplified narratives often overshadowed the nuanced realities of her life. Local activists and community leaders seized on Kayla's story as emblematic of broader social issues. They argued that her path reflected systemic failures, a lack of educational resources, inadequate mental health support, and the pervasive influence of gang culture. Efforts to address these root causes gained momentum in the wake of the Pulse shooting, with calls for increased funding for youth programs and arts initiatives designed to provide alternatives to violence. Yet, even within these efforts, the complexity of Kayla's identity resisted easy categorization. She embodied the contradictions of a young woman striving to assert herself in a world that offered few clear choices. Her artistry and her alleged criminality were entwined, each informing the other in ways that challenged simplistic judgments. As the investigation into the nightclub shooting progressed, this intricate portrait of Kayla became central to understanding the case. Prosecutors highlighted her background as context for alleged motives, suggesting that her environment shaped not only her opportunities, but also her decisions. Defense attorneys sought to emphasize the mitigating factors: her troubled upbringing, the influence of peers, and potential mental health struggles, as they prepared to challenge the charges. Within the courtroom and beyond, Kayla's story sparked broader conversations about youth caught between aspiration and adversity. The tension between her artistic promise and her alleged involvement in violence underscored the difficulties faced by many young people in marginalized communities. Her life became a lens through which the intersections of culture, identity, and crime were debated, reflecting enduring societal challenges. In the end, Kayla Martinez was not merely a defendant facing serious charges. She was a product of her environment, a complex individual whose talents and trials were inseparable. Her journey illuminated the fragile line between survival and self-destruction, artistry and aggression, hope and despair. As her case moved forward, the community grappled with these contradictions, seeking answers not only in the courtroom, but also in the broader quest for understanding and change. The investigation into the Pulse nightclub shooting unfolded with meticulous precision as law enforcement officials sought to piece together the chaotic events of that night. From the outset, the case was complex, involving numerous victims, multiple suspects, and a web of motivations rooted in long-standing rivalries. The forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and eyewitness testimonies became the backbone upon which the prosecution would build its case against Kayla Martinez and others implicated in the attack. Forensic teams scour the crime scene with unwavering focus, collecting ballistic evidence that would prove pivotal in linking weapons to the shooting. Shell casings recovered throughout the club were sent to specialized laboratories, where experts conducted ballistic analyses to match them with firearms seized during raids on suspected accomplices. This process not only confirmed the types of weapons used, but also established the trajectory of gunfire, helping reconstruct the sequence of events that turned a night of celebration into one of horror. Surveillance footage from Pulse's extensive security camera system provided a visual narrative of the night's escalation. Investigators reviewed hours of grainy video, identifying key moments and individuals. The footage revealed that Kayla had been present in the club prior to the shooting, moving deliberately through the crowd. At one point, she was seen exchanging brief words with several men later identified as gang affiliates, suggesting coordination. The video then captured the sudden outbreak of gunfire, with Kayla positioned near the epicenter of the violence, reinforcing suspicions of her active involvement. Eyewitness testimonies further illuminated the case, though they presented challenges due to the chaos and trauma experienced by those present. Survivors recounted the terrifying moments when gunfire erupted without warning, describing the confusion and panic as they sought escape. Several witnesses identified Kayla among the assailants, noting her composed demeanor amid the violence. One patron, who had been near the bar, described seeing her retrieve a firearm from a concealed bag moments before the shooting began. Another recalled her moving through the crowd with purpose, not as a frightened bystander, but as someone enacting a plan. Investigators also examined Kayla's phone records, uncovering a series of communications that painted a troubling picture. Text messages and call logs revealed frequent contact with known gang members in the weeks leading up to the shooting. Some messages contained coded language and references to settling scores and making a statement, phrases interpreted by law enforcement as indicative of a premeditated attack. These communications suggested that the nightclub shooting was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a calculated response rooted in gang rivalry. Further digital forensics uncovered social media posts made by Kayla and her associates that hinted at escalating tensions. Photos and videos showed confrontations between rival groups, with captions full of veiled threats and declarations of dominance. In the days before the attack, Kayla had posted images of herself armed and in gang colors, signaling a readiness for conflict. These online traces became critical evidence in establishing motive and premeditation in court. In addition to the digital trail, police uncovered physical evidence linking Kayla to the weapons used in the shooting. Searches of her residence and those of her known associates yielded firearms, ammunition, and materials used to modify weapons for concealment and enhanced lethality. Ballistic tests confirmed that at least one weapon found in these raids was responsible for fatal shots fired inside Pulse. This discovery cemented the prosecution's claim that Kayla had not only been present, but had played a direct role in the attack. Throughout the investigation, law enforcement officials worked closely with federal agencies, given the interstate connections of the gangs involved. The multi-jurisdictional effort aimed to dismantle the network behind the shooting and prevent further violence. Intelligence gathered during this collaboration revealed a pattern of retaliatory attacks and deep-seated vendettas that extended beyond Pulse, underscoring the broader context of gang conflict fueling the night's tragedy. Motivations for the shooting crystallized around these gang rivalries and personal vendettas. Prosecutors argued that the attack was orchestrated as retaliation for a prior incident in which members of Kayla's group had been targeted. The nightclub, known as a gathering place for rival factions, was deliberately chosen as a battleground to send a message of dominance and retribution. This framing was supported by the timing of communications, the presence of known gang members at Pulse that night, and the coordinated nature of the attack. The prosecution presented a narrative portraying Kayla as a key figure within this network, someone who leveraged her influence and connections to facilitate the assault. Her involvement in the planning stages was underscored by evidence of meetings and communications in the days leading up to the shooting. Witnesses testified to overhearing conversations about targeting pulse and escalating violence, painting a picture of a calculated and ruthless operation. Police interviews with Kayla's known associates further implicated her. Several co-conspirators facing their own charges provided statements detailing her leadership role and active participation. These testimonies described her as both a strategist and an enforcer, someone who took part in procuring weapons and coordinating logistics. One associate recounted how Kayla insisted on a clean execution of the plan, emphasizing the need to avoid collateral damage to innocent bystanders, a claim meant to underscore her cold calculation. Despite the mounting evidence, some aspects of the investigation faced hurdles. Witnesses' fear of retaliation led to reluctance in providing full accounts, necessitating the use of witness protection programs and anonymous testimonies. The chaotic nature of the shooting also complicated forensic reconstruction, with overlapping gunfire and multiple shooters making it difficult to attribute specific actions. Nevertheless, the cumulative weight of evidence created a compelling case against Kayla. Detectives and prosecutors highlighted the significance of Kayla's behavior during the arrest and interrogation, the infamous dance, as emblematic of her defiant attitude. Experts in criminal psychology were brought in to analyze this conduct, suggesting it was a form of psychological warfare, a way to assert control and intimidate. This interpretation was used to counter defense claims that her actions stemmed from trauma or mental instability. As the investigation neared completion, authorities prepared to present their findings in court. The evidence painted a stark picture of a young woman deeply embedded in a violent world, who had chosen to escalate conflict with devastating consequences. The links between forensic data, digital footprints, eyewitness accounts, and law enforcement intelligence formed a mosaic that prosecutors believed would convince a jury of Kayla's guilt. Throughout the city, the revelations from the investigation fueled public discourse on gang violence and youth crime. Community leaders emphasized the urgency of addressing the root causes that had propelled Kayla and others into this destructive path. Meanwhile, law enforcement underscored the relentless pursuit of justice for the victims and the need to dismantle the networks enabling such violence. In the wake of these developments, Kayla's defense team faced the daunting task of challenging a mountain of evidence. Questions about the accuracy of eyewitness accounts, the reliability of digital communications, and the interpretation of her behavior during arrest would become focal points in the legal battle ahead. For now, however, the investigation had laid bare the intricate and disturbing details of a night that shattered lives and tested the limits of justice in Los Angeles. As the investigation into the Pulse nightclub shooting deepened, experts were called upon to shed light on Kayla Martinez's unorthodox behavior, particularly her perplexing decision to dance during police interrogation. Psychologists, criminal behavior specialists, and forensic psychiatrists weighed in, offering interpretations that range from coping mechanisms to calculated defiance, all underscoring the complex psychological landscape that defined Kayla's actions. Clinical evaluations conducted in the weeks following her arrest suggested that Kayla exhibited signs consistent with trauma-induced dissociation, a psychological response common among individuals exposed to extreme stress and violence. According to Dr. Elena Ramirez, a forensic psychologist who assessed Kayla shortly after her detention, the dance could be understood as a dissociative coping strategy, a way to mentally detach from the gravity of the situation and the emotional turmoil of having been implicated in a mass shooting. It's not uncommon for victims or perpetrators of traumatic events to engage in behaviors that seem incongruous or even surreal, Dr. Ramirez explained during a deposition. The dance may have been a subconscious attempt to regain control in an uncontrollable moment. However, this interpretation was not universally accepted. Other experts posited that Kayla's behavior was less about trauma and more about asserting dominance and control in an adversarial environment. Dr. Jonathan Becker, a criminal behavior analyst, testified that the dance was a form of psychological warfare, a deliberate provocation designed to unsettle interrogators and convey a message of fearlessness. In high-stakes situations, some individuals resort to displays of bravado to mask vulnerability and intimidate authority figures, Dr. Becker asserted. Kayla's movements were calculated, signaling that she was not broken by the charges she faced. This duality in interpretation mirrored the conflicting narratives surrounding Kayla's psychological profile. Interviews with acquaintances, friends, and family painted a picture of a young woman struggling with emotional volatility and unresolved trauma. Several close contacts described mood swings marked by periods of intense energy and creativity, followed by bouts of anger and withdrawal. One longtime friend recounted moments when Kayla would abruptly shift from laughter to tears, suggesting underlying psychological distress. "She carried a lot inside," the friend said. "Sometimes it felt like she was battling herself more than anything else." Testimonies from those who knew Kayla also revealed a pattern of escalating aggression in the months leading up to the nightclub shooting. Neighbors recalled heated arguments and occasional physical confrontations, often sparked by minor disputes that seemed disproportionate to the circumstances. These incidents, while not uncommon in the neighborhood, were alarming in their frequency and intensity when linked to Kayla's behavior. "She was on edge," a community leader noted. "Something inside her was unraveling." Mental health professionals who reviewed Kayla's history highlighted the impact of chronic exposure to violence and instability during her formative years. Dr. Sheila Turner, an expert in trauma and adolescent psychology, emphasized that such environments often lead to complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, characterized by difficulties in emotional regulation, impulse control, and interpersonal relationships. Kayla's psychological state likely reflected the cumulative effects of trauma that went unaddressed, Dr. Turner explained. Her dance during interrogation might have been both a symptom and a signal of her fractured mental state. Compounding these psychological challenges was the influence of Kayla's social environment, which often reinforced antisocial behaviors. Interviews with former dance crew members and community youth workers depicted a milieu where aggression and defiance were sometimes valorized as survival tactics. Within these circles, Kayla was both admired for her talent and feared for her unpredictability. "She had a magnetic presence," one crew leader said, "but there was a darkness underneath that sometimes spilled over." Friends also spoke candidly about Kayla's involvement in activities that escalated her risk of legal trouble. Several recounted instances where she was pressured into confrontations or illicit dealings, highlighting the blurred lines between her artistic pursuits and the dangerous social network she navigated. These pressures, combined with her emotional volatility, created a volatile mix that seemed to spiral out of control as the Pulse shooting approached. Psychological experts called to testify during pretrial hearings painted a nuanced picture of Kayla's mental state. They emphasized that while she possessed considerable resilience and intelligence, her emotional regulations was compromised by trauma and environmental stressors. This complexity challenged simplistic labels of guilt or innocence, instead framing her actions within a broader context of psychological struggle and social influence. The defense sought to leverage these expert insights, arguing that Kayla's behavior during interrogation was not evidence of guilt or malice, but a manifestation of severe psychological distress. They contended that her dance was a desperate attempt to cope with overwhelming fear and confusion rather than an act of defiance. "This is a young woman who has endured profound trauma," her lead counsel argued. "Her actions must be understood through the lens of mental health, not merely criminal intent." However, the prosecution countered by highlighting Kayla's calculated planning and involvement in the shooting, asserting that her psychological state did not absolve her of responsibility. They emphasized that her behavior during interrogation was a conscious choice, designed to manipulate and challenge authority. Prosecutors introduced expert testimony framing her dance as part of a broader pattern of antisocial conduct, reinforcing the narrative of a hardened individual. Beyond expert analyses, testimonies from Kayla's acquaintances offered a window into her personal struggles. Several described episodes of mood instability, including explosive anger and periods of withdrawal, suggesting underlying mental health issues that went untreated. One former mentor recounted efforts to help Kayla seek counseling, efforts that were sporadic and ultimately unsuccessful due to resistance and environmental barriers. She was a bright kid, but the weight of her world was too heavy, the mentor said. The testimonies also revealed Kayla's complex interpersonal relationships marked by loyalty and conflict. Friends recalled her fierce protectiveness toward those she cared about, juxtaposed with sudden outbursts that alienated others. This volatility contributed to a social environment fraught with tension, complicating efforts to intervene or provide support. Community members and social workers echoed these concerns, emphasizing the need for early mental health intervention and support services tailored to youth in high-risk environments. Kayla's story became emblematic of systemic failures where trauma, poverty, and violence intersected without adequate resources or pathways to healing. Advocates argued that understanding her psychological profile was essential not only for justice in her case, but also for preventing similar tragedies. The unfolding psychological narrative added layers of complexity to the legal proceedings. It challenged jurors, attorneys, and the public to grapple with the interplay between mental health, personal responsibility, and the consequences of violent actions. Kayla's dance in the interrogation room, once dismissed as mere spectacle, was now reframed as a poignant symbol of a fractured psyche caught in the crossfire of trauma and defiance. As expert testimonies accumulated, the courtroom became a stage not only for legal arguments, but also for a broader conversation about the human factors underlying violent crime. Kayla Martinez, through her unusual behavior and troubled history, embodied the tensions between culpability and compassion, justice and understanding. These debates would play a crucial role in shaping the narrative of her trial and the community's reckoning with the tragedy that unfolded at Pulse. Prosecutors built a compelling case against Kayla Martinez, weaving together a narrative that portrayed the nightclub shooting not as a random act of violence, but a meticulously planned and executed assault rooted in gang rivalry and personal vendettas. In the courtroom, the prosecution sought to establish her direct involvement, motive, and psychological disposition through a combination of forensic evidence, eyewitness testimony, and expert analysis. Central to the prosecution's argument was the assertion that Kayla played a pivotal role in orchestrating the attack on Pulse. Prosecutor Rachel Kim outlined the sequence of events leading up to the shooting, emphasizing the communications between Kayla and known gang associates in the days prior. Text messages uncovered during the investigation revealed detailed discussions about targeting rival factions, with Kayla actively participating in the planning process. This was not a spontaneous outburst of violence, Kim stated during opening arguments. It was a calculated act designed to send a message. The motive, prosecutors argued, was retaliation. Evidence presented in court linked the shooting to a prior incident involving members of Kayla's group, who had been attacked and humiliated by rival gangs. The nightclub, a known gathering place for these opposing groups, was chosen deliberately as the site for retribution. The prosecution painted Kayla as a figure driven by loyalty and a desire to assert dominance, willing to escalate conflict with deadly consequences. Eyewitnesses who survived the shooting provided harrowing accounts that reinforced the prosecution's narrative. Several identified Kayla as an active participant, describing her calm and purposeful demeanor amid the chaos. One witness testified to seeing Kayla retrieve a firearm just moments before the gunfire erupted, while another recounted her movements through the crowd as coordinated and intentional. These testimonies were bolstered by surveillance footage showing Kayla in proximity to the weapons and the epicenter of violence. Forensic experts added weight to the prosecution's case by detailing ballistic analyses that linked weapons found in Kayla's possession and those seized from her associates directly to the fatal shots fired inside Pulse. The trajectory and impact of the bullets were reconstructed to demonstrate the precision and intent behind the attack. This scientific evidence was presented to underscore the premeditated nature of the crime and Kayla's active role. Psychological experts called by the prosecution addressed Kayla's infamous dance during interrogation, reframing it as a calculated provocation rather than a sign of trauma or confusion. Dr. Jonathan Becker testified that such behavior was indicative of antisocial tendencies and a desire to intimidate authority figures. This was a performance intended to convey control and fearlessness, he stated. It was not the behavior of someone overwhelmed by guilt or remorse. The prosecution also highlighted Kayla's leadership within her social circles, portraying her as both respected and feared. Testimonies from former associates and gang members described her as instrumental in coordinating activities and enforcing discipline. One witness detailed how Kayla had insisted on the procurement and concealment of weapons, emphasizing the need for a clean execution of the plan. These accounts served to solidify the image of Kayla as a key strategist in the attack. To further establish motive and intent, the prosecution introduced evidence of social media activity in the weeks preceding the shooting. Posts displayed Kayla brandishing firearms and making veiled threats against rival groups, signaling a readiness for violent confrontation. These digital footprints painted a picture of escalation and premeditation, strengthening the argument that the attack was a deliberate act of revenge. Throughout the trial, prosecutors meticulously connected the dots between the digital evidence, forensic findings, and eyewitness statements. This comprehensive approach aimed to leave no doubt about Kayla's culpability and the cold-blooded nature of the crime. The narrative underscored the devastating impact on victims and the community, emphasizing the need for accountability. The prosecution also addressed the defense's anticipated arguments regarding Kayla's mental health and psychological state. By presenting expert testimony that framed her behavior as calculated rather than impaired, they sought to counter claims of diminished responsibility. Prosecutor Kim argued that Kayla's actions reflected a conscious and deliberate choice to engage in violence, making her fully accountable under the law. In addition to establishing Kayla's involvement, the prosecution sought to demonstrate the broader implications of the crime. They highlighted the ripple effects of gang violence on communities, portraying the shooting as part of a destructive cycle that endangered innocent lives. Victim impact statements were introduced, with family members recounting the profound loss and lasting trauma caused by the attack. These emotional testimonies underscored the human cost behind the legal proceedings. The prosecution's case was further bolstered by the testimony of law enforcement officials involved in the investigation. Detective Marcus Lee recounted the meticulous efforts to piece together the sequence of events, emphasizing the strength of the evidence linking Kayla to the attack. He described her demeanor during arrest and interrogation, noting the unusual and chilling nature of her dance. It was clear she was unrepentant, Lee testified. Her actions spoke volumes about her intent. Throughout the trial, the prosecution maintained a narrative of a young woman who had chosen violence over peace, planning and executing an attack that shattered lives. They argued that the severity of the crime and the deliberate nature of the assault warranted the harshest penalties available. Closing statements underscored the need for justice not only for the victims, but also as a deterrent against future acts of gang-related violence. The courtroom atmosphere during the prosecution's presentation was intense. Families of victims sat in silent anguish, absorbing the details of the case and the portrait of Kayla as a calculated perpetrator. Community members and observers grappled with the stark realities revealed, confronting the complexities of youth violence and the challenges of rehabilitation. As the prosecution rested its case, the weight of the evidence and the compelling narrative set a high bar for the defense. The trial had illuminated not only the facts of the shooting, but also the intricate web of social, psychological, and criminal factors that defined Kayla's journey. The stage was set for a legal battle that would delve deeply into questions of responsibility, motive, and the possibility of redemption. In the end, the prosecution's case against Kayla Martinez was a relentless pursuit of justice, built on a foundation of detailed evidence and expert testimony. It portrayed a narrative of cold calculation and ruthless intent, challenging the court to hold accountable a young woman whose actions had irrevocably altered the lives of many. The trial unfolding amid the echoes of tragedy, was a testament to the complexities of crime and punishment in a fractured society. In the courtroom, the defense team for Kayla Martinez faced an uphill battle, tasked with dismantling a formidable prosecution case rooted in extensive forensic evidence, eyewitness testimony, and psychological expert analyses. Their strategy sought to humanize Kayla, emphasizing her troubled mental health, coerced involvement under gang pressure, and challenging the reliability of key evidence presented against her. Central to the defense's argument was the claim of diminished responsibility. Her attorneys presented a narrative that Kayla was a young woman overwhelmed by psychological trauma and coercion, rather than a cold-blooded mastermind intent on violence. Psychiatric experts testified that Kayla suffered from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, stemming from years of exposure to violence and instability in her neighborhood. Dr. Sheila Turner, called by the defense, explained that such trauma could impair judgment, emotional regulation, and susceptibility to external influence. Ms. Martinez's mental health challenges significantly compromised her ability to make rational decisions, Dr. Turner asserted. Her behavior during interrogation, including the dancing, was a manifestation of psychological distress, not calculated defiance. The defense further argued that Kayla's involvement in the nightclub shooting was not voluntary, but the result of coercion and manipulation by more dominant gang figures. Witnesses described a milieu where loyalty was enforced through intimidation and fear, making refusal dangerous. One former associate testified that Kayla had been pressured into participating, fearing violent repercussions if she declined. She was caught in a web she couldn't easily escape, the witness said. Her actions were driven by survival, not malice. To undermine the prosecution's eyewitness accounts, the defense scrutinized the conditions under which testimonies were given. They highlighted inconsistencies among witness statements, pointing to the chaos and trauma of the shooting as factors that could impair memory and perception. Cross-examinations revealed contradictions in descriptions of Kayla's movements and behavior, suggesting that some identifications were unreliable or influenced by bias. The defense contended that fear of retaliation also contributed to inaccuracies, as witnesses might have altered statements out of self-preservation. Surveillance footage, a cornerstone of the prosecution's case, was also challenged. Defense experts questioned the clarity and interpretation of the grainy images, arguing that the video did not conclusively place Kayla in the role alleged. They suggested alternative explanations for her presence near the weapons and shooting area, positing that she may have been trying to escape or assist others rather than actively participating in the attack. Video evidence must be scrutinized thoroughly, the defense counsel argued. Assumptions based on poor quality footage cannot replace reasonable doubt. A critical component of the defense centered on Kayla's mental state during interrogation, where prosecutors depicted her dance as a calculated act of intimidation. The defense framed it as a coping mechanism born of severe psychological trauma. They presented testimony from trauma specialists who explained how individuals under extreme stress might engage in dissociative behaviors, including seemingly incongruent actions like dancing amid crisis. Her movements were a desperate attempt to manage overwhelming anxiety and dissociation, Dr. Turner elaborated. This should be viewed with empathy, not condemnation. The defense also called upon character witnesses who spoke of Kayla's artistic talents and attempts to distance herself from gang life. Former mentors and community workers testified about her efforts to pursue dance as a positive outlet, emphasizing her potential and the environmental obstacles she faced. One dance crew leader recounted how Kayla had sought to leave behind dangerous associations, but struggled due to social pressures and lack of support. These testimonies aim to paint a picture of a young woman caught in circumstances beyond her control, striving for redemption. Throughout the trial, defense attorneys highlighted systemic failures that contributed to Kayla's trajectory. They argued that inadequate social services, insufficient mental health resources, and the pervasive influence of gang culture created an environment where young people like Kayla were vulnerable to exploitation. This case is about more than individual guilt, the lead defense counsel stated in closing arguments. It is about a society that failed to protect its youth and address the root causes of violence. The defense's approach also sought to challenge the prosecution's portrayal of Kayla as a cold and calculating figure. They emphasized her youth, emotional fragility, and the complexities of her environment, urging the jury to consider the mitigating factors in her actions. She is not a monster, the defense argued. She is a product of trauma and coercion, deserving of compassion and rehabilitation, not just punishment. Despite these efforts, the defense faced skepticism from the jury, who grappled with the overwhelming evidence linking Kayla to the shooting. The prosecution's narrative of premeditation and leadership contrasted sharply with the defense's portrayal of vulnerability. Jurors questioned whether psychological distress could absolve responsibility for such a devastating crime, especially given the calculated nature of the attack. The defense also contended with challenges in discrediting the expert testimony presented by the prosecution, particularly regarding Kayla's interrogation dance. Prosecutors had framed this behavior as emblematic of her antisocial tendencies, and some jurors found this portrayal compelling. The defense's reframing of the dance as a trauma response required jurors to navigate complex psychological concepts, adding layers of difficulty to their deliberations. As the trial progressed, public opinion was divided. Supporters of the defense advocated for a greater focus on mental health and rehabilitation, while others demanded accountability and justice for the victims. The media coverage reflected these tensions, with opinion pieces debating the implications of Kayla's background and behavior for the broader issues of crime and punishment. The defense's strategy to cast doubt on eyewitness reliability and surveillance evidence aimed to establish reasonable doubt, a cornerstone of criminal defense. However, the cumulative weight of forensic data, corroborated by multiple independent sources, presented a formidable hurdle. The jury was left to weigh conflicting narratives and decide whether Kayla's psychological struggles mitigated her culpability or whether her actions warranted conviction. Throughout the proceedings, Kayla's demeanor was often subdued, a stark contrast to the defiant dance that had captivated public attention. Observers noted moments of vulnerability during testimony, as she listened to accounts of the victim's suffering and grappled with the gravity of her situation. These moments humanized her in the eyes of some, complicating the simplistic labels of guilt or innocence. Ultimately, the defense's challenges underscored the complexities inherent in cases involving young defendants with troubled backgrounds and mental health issues. They highlighted the tensions between seeking justice for victims and recognizing the multifaceted nature of human behavior shaped by environment and trauma. As closing arguments approached, the trial had become not just a legal battle, but a profound exploration of accountability, mental health, and the societal forces that mold individuals. The jury faced the daunting task of sifting through a labyrinth of evidence, expert opinions, and emotional testimony to reach a verdict that would reverberate far beyond the courtroom walls. After a trial marked by emotional testimony, complex expert analyses, and fierce legal arguments, the jury convened to deliberate the fate of Kayla Martinez. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation as the 12 jurors retreated, their task both daunting and consequential. The charges against Kayla, multiple counts of first-degree murder and assault, carried the weight of devastating loss and demanded a verdict that would resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The jury's deliberation, though intense, was relatively brief. After several hours of discussion, they returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. The decision was met with a mixture of relief and sorrow among the families of the victims, whose grief had been laid bare during the proceedings. Tears flowed silently as the weight of justice, however painful, began to settle. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was charged. Victims' families, many of whom had waited years for closure, expressed a complex array of emotions: anguish at their loss, vindication in the verdict, and a profound yearning for healing. Maria Alvarez, whose son had been among those killed, spoke softly after the verdict. "Justice has been served, but nothing can bring him back," she said. "We hope this brings some peace to others who suffered." The sentencing phase that followed underscored the gravity of Kayla's crimes. Given the nature of the offenses and the jury's verdict, the prosecution sought the maximum penalty available under state law: life imprisonment plus 50 years without the possibility of parole. This sentence reflected not only the cold-blooded nature of the attack, but also a clear message about the consequences of such violence within the community. During the penalty phase, the defense attempted to appeal to the court's sense of mercy, emphasizing Kayla's troubled background, mental health struggles, and potential for rehabilitation. They presented additional psychological evaluations and character references, advocating for a sentence that allowed the possibility of eventual release and treatment. "She is a product of trauma and circumstance," her attorney pleaded. "The sentence should reflect the potential for redemption." The judge, however, acknowledged the compelling arguments, but ultimately prioritized the severity of the crime and the need for public safety. In a solemn and measured ruling, the court handed down the sentence of life imprisonment plus 50 years, ensuring that Kayla would never be released. "The nature of these crimes demands the highest level of accountability," the judge stated. "This sentence reflects the profound impact on victims, their families, and the community." The courtroom reacted in a mixture of solemn acceptance and subdued grief. For the victims' families, the sentence provided a measure of closure, though the legacy of loss remained indelible. For Kayla, the sentence marked a life irrevocably altered, confined within prison walls for the foreseeable future. The case ignited a broader conversation about juvenile justice, mental health intervention, and gang violence prevention. Advocates and policymakers used the trial and sentencing as a catalyst to examine existing systems and advocate for reforms aimed at addressing the root causes that led to such tragedies. Community organizations intensified efforts to provide resources and support to at-risk youth, hoping to prevent future violence through education, outreach, and empowerment. Media coverage of the verdict and sentence was extensive, highlighting the complexities of the case and the societal issues it brought to light. Commentators debated the balance between punishment and rehabilitation, the role of mental health in criminal responsibility, and the challenges of dismantling entrenched cycles of gang violence. The image of Kayla's dance during interrogation continued to evoke strong reactions, symbolizing the enigmatic intersection of defiance and despair. In the days following the verdict, the community grappled with the aftermath. Vigils and memorials honored the victims, while forums and panels engaged residents in discussions about healing and prevention. The Pulse nightclub shooting remained a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the consequences of unresolved conflict. Kayla's sentencing also prompted reflection within the justice system. Legal experts debated the efficacy of harsh penalties versus rehabilitative approaches, particularly for young offenders with complex psychological backgrounds. The case underscored the need for integrated strategies that combine accountability with support for mental health and social services. As Kayla was led away to begin her life behind bars, the courtroom emptied, leaving behind echoes of a trial that had exposed the darkest facets of human behavior and the enduring hope for justice. Her incarceration symbolized both society's condemnation of violence and the profound challenges of addressing the intertwined issues of crime, trauma, and community. The families of the victims, while mourning their loss, expressed a cautious hope that the case would serve as a turning point. Initiatives sprung up aiming to break the cycles of violence and provide alternatives for youth in neighborhoods like Kayla's. The trial had laid bare not only individual culpability, but also systemic failures demanding attention. In the weeks and months that followed, the legal proceedings gave way to community action. Local leaders, activists, and organizations collaborated to implement programs focused on conflict resolution, mental health awareness, and artistic expression as tools for empowerment. Kayla's story became a somber lesson in the consequences of neglect and the urgent need for intervention. The trial and sentencing of Kayla Martinez thus stood as a pivotal moment, a harsh reckoning with the realities of gang violence and the complexities of youth caught in its grip. It was a case that challenged the justice system, tested the community's resilience, and sparked vital conversations about prevention, rehabilitation, and hope for a safer future. The conviction and sentencing of Kayla Martinez for the Pulse nightclub shooting reverberated far beyond the courtroom, igniting a fierce and multifaceted debate within Los Angeles and beyond about juvenile justice, mental health support, and strategies to combat gang violence. The case became a catalyst for reflection and reform, prompting community leaders, policymakers, and activists to confront the systemic issues that had contributed to such a devastating tragedy. One of the most pressing discussions centered on juvenile justice. Kayla's age and background highlighted the challenges of adjudicating serious crimes committed by young offenders, particularly those with complex psychological and social histories. Advocates argued that while accountability was essential, the justice system needed to balance punishment with rehabilitation, especially for youth whose actions were deeply intertwined with trauma and environmental factors. This discourse spurred calls for reforms aimed at providing more comprehensive mental health assessments and tailored interventions before young people reach the point of committing violent acts. Simultaneously, the case shed light on the dire need for enhanced mental health support within high-risk communities. Experts underscored that Kayla's behavior, both her involvement in the shooting and her unusual dance during interrogation, was symptomatic of unaddressed trauma and psychological distress. Community organizations and health professionals pushed for increased funding and accessibility to mental health services, emphasizing early intervention programs in schools and neighborhoods plagued by violence. The goal was to identify at-risk youth and provide therapeutic resources that could mitigate the factors leading to criminal behavior. Gang violence prevention became another focal point of the post-trial conversation. The Pulse shooting was a stark example of how entrenched rivalries and cycles of retaliation could erupt into catastrophic violence. City officials, law enforcement, and grassroots groups collaborated to develop strategies aimed at disrupting these cycles. Initiatives included conflict mediation programs, community policing efforts designed to build trust between residents and officers, and outreach campaigns that engaged young people in alternatives to gang affiliation, such as arts, education, and employment opportunities. In response to the community's demand for proactive measures, new outreach programs were launched targeting neighborhoods similar to where Kayla had grown up. These programs sought to provide safe spaces for youth to express themselves creatively while fostering mentorship and leadership skills. Local dance crews, once seen as peripheral to gang activities, were embraced as potential allies in these efforts, offering positive outlets for energy and identity that could deter involvement in violence. Media coverage of the case played a significant role in shaping public opinion and policy discourse. News outlets revisited the complexities behind Kayla's story, moving beyond sensational headlines to explore the societal dynamics at play. Editorials debated the risks of glamorizing defiance and criminality, cautioning against oversimplified narratives that failed to acknowledge the underlying causes. This nuanced reporting helped foster a broader understanding of the intersection between individual choices and systemic issues. The case also prompted discussions within the legal community about the adequacy of current laws addressing juvenile offenders involved in serious crimes. Some legal experts advocated for legislation that would allow for more flexible sentencing options, incorporating treatment and rehabilitation into custodial sentences. Others emphasized the importance of preserving strict penalties to deter violent acts and protect communities, reflecting the tension between justice and mercy that the trial had illuminated. Educational institutions in affected areas responded by increasing efforts to incorporate social-emotional learning and trauma-informed practices into their curricula, recognizing that schools often served as frontline environments for identifying and supporting at-risk youth. Educators sought to equip staff with training to recognize signs of distress and provide appropriate interventions. These changes aim to create safer and more supportive spaces that could interrupt pathways to violence. Victims' advocacy groups emerged as powerful voices in the aftermath, emphasizing the need for victim-centered approaches within the justice system and community programming. They called for resources dedicated to healing and support for families affected by violence, highlighting the long-term impact that such tragedies have on individuals and neighborhoods. Their efforts ensured that the human cost remained central in conversations about prevention and reform. At the policy level, city officials convened task forces to address the multifaceted challenges spotlighted by the case. These groups included representatives from law enforcement, social services, education, healthcare, and community organizations, working collaboratively to develop integrated strategies. The aim was to create cohesive frameworks that address the root causes of violence rather than merely responding to its symptoms. The legacy of Kayla Martinez's case also influenced cultural dialogues about youth identity and agency. Artists, activists, and community leaders used the story as a springboard to discuss the pressures and contradictions faced by young people navigating environments rife with violence and limited opportunity. Initiatives promoting art and dance as vehicles for empowerment gained traction, underscoring the potential for creative expression to serve both as personal healing and social change. Despite these efforts, challenges remained. The deep-seated nature of gang affiliations, economic disparities, and systemic neglect meant that progress was often slow and uneven. The case served as a sobering reminder of the complexities involved in addressing violence and the necessity of sustained, multifaceted responses. Throughout these developments, Kayla's story continued to resonate as a cautionary tale about the consequences of unaddressed trauma and the failure of social systems to intervene effectively. Her trajectory, from a young dancer caught between worlds to a convicted perpetrator of a deadly act, highlighted the urgent need for comprehensive strategies that encompass prevention, intervention, and justice. As Los Angeles and other cities grappled with these challenges, the case underscored the importance of community engagement in shaping solutions. Grassroots voices called for policies informed by lived experience and cultural understanding, advocating for approaches that respected the dignity and potential of youth while confronting the realities of violence. In the broader national context, the Pulse nightclub shooting and subsequent trial became a reference point in discussions about youth crime and violence prevention. Policymakers and practitioners examined lessons learned, seeking to replicate successful interventions and avoid pitfalls. The case illuminated the intricate interplay of social environment, mental health, and justice, informing dialogues at multiple levels. Ultimately, the aftermath of Kayla Martinez's conviction sparked a multifaceted response aimed at breaking cycles of violence and fostering safer, healthier communities. While the scars of that tragic night remained, the collective efforts inspired by the case offered a pathway toward hope, one rooted in understanding, prevention, and the commitment to protect vulnerable youth from a similar fate. Kayla Martinez's incarceration marked the beginning of a complex chapter, one that would ignite ongoing debates about rehabilitation, punishment, and the broader social factors intertwined with violent crime. Her journey behind bars illuminated the tensions between justice and mercy, sparking discourse on how society addresses young offenders entangled in cycles of trauma and violence. In prison, Kayla confronted the harsh reality of life, sentenced to life imprisonment plus 50 years. Reports from correctional officers and counselors painted a portrait of a young woman grappling with profound isolation and remorse, yet also exhibiting moments of resilience and introspection. The stark contrast between the defiant dance that had captivated the public's imagination and the subdued inmate behind the cell bars underscored the multifaceted nature of her experience. Mental health professionals working within the prison system observed that Kayla struggled with severe depression and anxiety, conditions not uncommon among incarcerated individuals facing lengthy sentences. Access to psychological support was limited but essential, aimed at managing symptoms and preventing further deterioration. Counselors noted her occasional withdrawal, but also her participation in educational and therapeutic programs, suggesting a glimmer of hope for personal growth despite the confinement. Kayla's case became emblematic of the broader challenges faced by correctional institutions in balancing security with rehabilitation. Advocates argued that long sentences, while reflecting societal condemnation of violent crimes, should be paired with robust mental health services and opportunities for inmates to transform. Her situation highlighted gaps in the system and fueled calls for reforms focused on restorative justice and reintegration, even for those serving life terms. Outside prison walls, the legacy of the Pulse nightclub shooting continued to ripple through the community. Initiatives birthed in the aftermath of the case expanded and evolved, driven by activists, educators, and policymakers determined to address the root causes of violence. Programs focusing on youth empowerment, mental health awareness, and creative expression gained momentum, aiming to intervene before destructive patterns took hold. Among these efforts was a notable emphasis on the arts as a vehicle for healing and identity formation. Dance, once a backdrop to Kayla's turbulent life, was embraced as a tool for connection and rehabilitation. Community centers and nonprofits launched workshops and mentorship programs, inviting at-risk youth to channel their energies into movement and performance. These initiatives sought not only to foster talent, but also to provide a sense of belonging and purpose, countering the allure of gang affiliation. Activists continued to spotlight the systemic inequalities and social neglect that had shaped Kayla's path. They advocated for increased investment in education, affordable housing, and mental health resources, arguing that prevention required a holistic approach. The case became a rallying point for those pushing against cycles of poverty and violence, emphasizing the need for comprehensive social change. Legal scholars and criminal justice reform advocates engaged in ongoing dialogue about the implications of Kayla's trial and sentencing. Debates centered on juvenile sentencing laws, the role of mental health in determining culpability, and the potential for rehabilitation within the prison system. The case underscored the complexities of assigning blame and crafting appropriate responses for young offenders shaped by trauma and environment. In academic circles, Kayla's story inspired research into the intersections of youth violence, mental health, and the criminal justice system. Studies examined how early intervention, community support, and therapeutic approaches could alter trajectories similar to hers. These inquiries aim to inform policies that balanced accountability with compassion, striving to reduce recidivism and promote healing. The public continued to grapple with the image of Kayla, the young woman who danced amid interrogation, who once embodied both promise and peril. For some, she remained a symbol of defiance and danger. For others, a tragic figure caught in circumstances beyond her control. This duality fueled ongoing conversations about identity, culpability, and the potential for redemption. Families of the victims maintained their advocacy, focusing on remembrance and prevention. They supported initiatives aimed at educating youth about the consequences of violence and promoting community resilience. Their voices underscored the enduring human cost behind legal proceedings and societal debates. As years passed, Kayla's case remained a touchstone in discussions about justice and social responsibility. It highlighted the need for nuanced approaches that recognize the complexity of human behavior and the profound impact of environment and trauma. The lessons drawn from her story continued to inform efforts to create safer, more supportive communities. While Kayla's future within the prison system was uncertain, her case catalyzed a broader movement toward understanding and addressing the multifaceted roots of youth violence. Activists and professionals alike emphasized that meaningful change required collaboration across sectors and sustained commitment to social equity. The legacy of the Pulse nightclub shooting and the trial that followed served as a powerful reminder that behind headlines and verdicts lie intricate human stories shaped by forces both personal and systemic. Kayla Martinez's journey, marked by tragedy and complexity, challenged society to confront uncomfortable truths and strive for solutions that balance justice with humanity.